Hello everybody and welcome to today's video all about 11 practical tips for street photography. These are things I use when I'm out and about doing street photography, which I've been doing more and more of in the past couple of years and really finding it enjoyable. And I hope you find it helpful whether you're just getting started in street photography or if you've tried street photography or maybe struggling a little bit. So I hope these ideas are helpful. If you have some tips, suggestions, things you do in your street photography, please leave them in the comments below and let's have a chat. Look forward to that. Before we get started, if you haven't already watched one of the 5,385,425 videos about street photography on YouTube, here's just a couple things before we get started. First, I'm not an attorney, so this isn't legal advice, but it's my understanding of the law around this type of photography as it applies in the US, the United States. So first thing to know is that photographing people in public in the US is legal. When you are in public, you do not have what's called an expectation of privacy. So for non-commercial use, someone can make your photo. Let's talk about being a nice human being in the midst of all that. So the first thing about that is if just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. I call it the speedo principle. Just because you can wear a speedo swimsuit doesn't mean you should. So to kind of summarize that, you're allowed to make photos of anybody in public, but it doesn't mean you should. Here's a couple of instances, especially I think, to pay attention to. One, don't photograph other people's children. It's just open to a whole bunch of misunderstanding and just probably not a good thing to do. Second, my recommendation is not photograph someone who's in public, but you're photographing their negative situation. Maybe they're having a down day. Maybe they're unhoused. Maybe something's just unfortunate that if it was you wouldn't want someone to photograph it. So that's a thought on that. And the second thing is, or I guess the third thing, I can't count, that's why I have the list for, is as you're out and about making photos, if it doesn't feel comfortable to you, pay attention to that. And maybe that's not a time to make a photo. So that's my understanding of the U.S. legal rights to make photographs of people when they're out in public. So let's move on with some suggestions, some tips that I hope will be helpful to you. So I'm going to do these 11 tips backwards, kind of like the old David Letterman top 10 list. He would start at number 10, work his way back to number 1. I'm going to start at number 11, and in case you wonder why my lists go to 11, watch This Is Spinal Tap. All right, so we're going to start with number 11, and number 11 is to get comfortable. And I think there's two components to getting comfortable. The first is physical, so pay attention to the weather, be aware of what the forecast is, and maybe dress in layers or dress appropriately for the day. But perhaps the most important part in my discovery of being comfortable physically in walking around is the shoes you wear. So I have a nice pair of tennis shoes I wear during the summer months and spring, and then I have some boots I wear during the winter and fall. So good footwear is super important. So the second part of being comfortable is the mental part, is being comfortable in whatever space you're in. So for me, that means downtown Bellevue. It's a place I've been to a lot. I've lived a lot. So I'm very, very comfortable there. Plus there's free parking. So that's a good thing for me. So whatever that means for you, pay attention to it. I've found that when I'm more comfortable in a space, I tend to be able to get lost in the space and notice things differently than when I'm stressed for one reason or another. Number 10 on the list is to have extra batteries and memory cards. This comes from the dad in me to always kind of be prepared. It used to be when I was using older Fuji cameras and they had the smaller batteries, I'd have 3 or 4 batteries. Now with the XH2S that I'm using, it has a larger battery. I just need 1. But it's pretty common that in a 2 to 4 hour day, I'll need an extra battery. So always have at least 1 extra battery. The second thing to have extras of, just to be safe, is memory cards. My camera has 2 different kinds of memory cards. So I have 1 of each extra at least, and I found that helpful as kind of insurance. I've never had a memory card go bad, and I've been using digital cameras since 2004, but it's good just in case. As you can see on my camera here, I have 8,140 photos left to go. So yeah, I'm not worried so much about filling the card as if something went bad. It's always good to have an extra. And if you're with somebody and their card goes bad, then you can be a friend and loan them one. So I always have extras of those, relatively inexpensive peace of mind and insurance. Tip number 9 is to keep your camera settings simple. Depending on how you like to photograph and how comfortable you are with the exposure math, my suggestion is to leave your camera in one of the auto modes and then concentrate on composition, what's in the frame of the photo, rather than the math of is it too bright, is it too dark. So a couple suggestions around that, a couple tips would be if the depth of field, what's in focus in the photo, is most important in the story you're trying to tell, that would be aperture priority. If the appearance of motion, so if you want to blur something or freeze something that's moving quickly, that would be shutter priority for that story. And if you're not sure which, then use the program mode. I tell people, you can tell your friends that stands for professional. Yeah, the P mode, it stands for professional. It's really program, but they don't need to know that. And then you can use, with those 3 modes, you can use exposure compensation as a quick way to make your photo brighter or darker, depending on, again, the scene you're with and the story you're trying to tell visually. So if you're not comfortable with the math of doing your own aperture, shutter speed, ISO, paying attention to the exposure meter, or adjusting all 3 of those potentially for every photo, by all means use one of the auto modes and keep it simple. Tip number 8 is to keep your camera gear simple. For me, simple is not as simple as some folks on that do this that I've noticed on YouTube. They do 1 camera, 1 lens. I do 1 camera, 3 lenses, and they're all zoom lenses, but that's me. So that's what simple means to me. Here's one of the reasons I suggest keeping your camera gear simple when you're going out to do street photography in particular. It's easy to get overwhelmed with options. I think about anytime I sit down to watch a movie on Netflix and there's 10 million that I want to watch, so I end up scrolling for an hour trying to find the one, and I end up not watching anything. So sometimes with camera gear, if you've got all your lenses, if you have too many lenses, if you have multiple camera bodies, then you're trying to figure out, what do I need for this moment? And you miss the moment, or the moment has happened and gone on. So my suggestion is keep it simple, discover what that means for you. I have over time developed what is my general use of gear. So I have the 3 lenses I mentioned, plus 1 camera in a bag. I'm good to go. Tip number 7 for your street photography, helping you to find ways to enjoy it more and be more successful at it, is to have a general plan for the route you're going to take. For me, I have a few different routes I go when I go to Bellevue. I have a general idea of what I'm going to do, and then sometimes I'll make a side trip or whatever. But I find for me, having a general plan, kind of a big framework to play in, that gives me then freedom and peace of mind when I'm getting started, to know that then I can vary it depending on what's happening in the day, what the weather's doing, what's either construction is doing, or activities or events or people, or all the variables that happen in street photography, I can be responsive to when I have the peace of mind that I kind of have a general plan. So that I find very, very helpful. If you're new to an area and you can potentially, if you have a vehicle, you can scout by car. I found that very, very helpful. It gives you a kind of a quick, like a time-lapse almost view of the route you might take, especially if it's new. So being familiar is a great way to feel more comfortable so that you can concentrate on creating the photos that you want. Number 6 suggestion I have is to have a general plan also for your photo goals, maybe an assignment even. Here's why I suggest to have these general plans both for a route and for your goals. For me, just saying I'm going to go out and do photos with no plan, it's not scary so much. It's just that I personally need a general direction to start in. Give me a framework that I can play in, and then let me improvise within that framework. So for a plan for your photos of the day, maybe you want to do something around maybe abstract, or you want to do black and white. Give yourself an assignment, something somewhat specific, but then be open to other things. If you find that you're struggling with even where do I start in this street photography thing? Zach Arias, a photographer out of Atlanta, he says, if you don't know where to start somewhere. So give yourself a plan. And if you need a plan, if you need an assignment, I have a whole bunch of photo assignments I'd be glad to share with you. So leave that in the comment below, and I'm glad to give you a little assignment. So give yourself a little bit of structure to get you started, to get you visualizing what you might see. But then I also strongly encourage you to be open to what might happen in front of you on the day you're out making photos. Number 5 habit I want to suggest to you is to be patient. My experience is that sometimes a scene, a location has potential, but it's not happening right in the moment. So you might need to wait a little while. And that little while might be 2 minutes, it might be 20 minutes, who knows? But as you develop this skill and do more street photography, you'll kind of get a sense of, in the environment you're in, how much time is enough to be patient and how much is, well, nothing's going to happen. So learning that wiggle room of when that happens will be helpful to you. So here's a recent example for me. I found this location at a bus stop with construction happening on the other side of the street that has this granite pillar that I've walked by a million times, and all of a sudden I noticed it acts like a mirror. So I stood here with the camera for a little while, probably 15, 20 minutes. So I'm kind of hidden and camouflaged by the rest of the building here. So I can comfortably stand here and kind of be unnoticed as I watch people walk by and cars drive by. So I was here for probably 15 minutes or so, and trying to get different groupings of people, different groupings of vehicles. I like this one where it looks like they're going to crash into each other. And plus, this location just feeds my symmetry that I like so much. Just different, paying attention to what's going to come into the scene. I was using burst mode, so I'm taking 3 to 5 photos, and then you find the one in the sequence of maybe that 3 to 4 seconds that looks the best. And for me, this is one of my favorites of the day. I really like the yellow jacket. I like the blur. I like the leaving the scene. I like the symmetry in the back with the yellow of the construction workers, all the things. So it took a while to find this photo, but it was worth the wait for me. I really like that sequence of photos, and it was fun discovering that after I've walked by it a number of times, but all of a sudden on that day, I noticed that spot. So be patient with yourself in discovering places. You won't see them all the first time you go. And then secondly, be patient in the moment and location to see what might happen in front of you. Tip number 4 is kind of the opposite of that one, is to keep moving. You have to know when it's time to maybe move on from a location, to know where activities might be happening of people or places or things that might be interesting. So don't necessarily sit down. At least for me, if I sit down, then all of a sudden I'm out of photo mode. So for me, the continual walking, or at least standing and moving to a next location, is really helpful. So again, that help comes along with thinking about the route you might take. So think about, okay, where am I going to go next? But be present where you are now. It's complicated, and it takes some practice to get used to. How do you do all these things in the midst of then also you're making photos? So keep moving when it's time to be done, being patient. Tip number 3 I have for you and would suggest, and I found so very helpful, is to turn around. It's amazing what is in front of your camera, and then when you turn around, there's something else. Literally do a 180. That's one way to look at this. So for example, in this photo, these construction workers having a conversation with some gestures, and then I turn around and this guy's running down the stairs to go somewhere after he left Starbucks. So you never know what you're going to find as you turn around. A couple other thoughts on this is, What happens as you turn around, the light is going to be interacting with your subject from a different direction, so it might look totally different. Plus, your perspective change of seeing it from the other side will also possibly open up new photo opportunities. Another suggestion related to all this is instead of doing a loop route, which is what I often do, I'll start in one place, walk around, and then kind of do a big circle or square and end up where I started, is to go out. And then when you get about halfway, whatever that means for you, retrace your steps and come back to where you started rather than looping around. So you're kind of doing a out and back. That way you're seeing the same stuff, but from the other perspective that you saw it originally. So all those things can be really, really helpful when you're looking for photos. Sometimes the photos are behind you and you didn't see it when you were going in the other direction. Tip number 2 I have is to be patient with yourself and plan more than one visit. You're going to need to return. I've been concentrating on street photography for the past couple of years. I'm recording this video at the end of July in 2023. So far, I've done 18 street photography visits to different locations, mostly downtown Bellevue. Last year, 2022, I did 23 visits in the whole year, so I'm already on pace just a little more than halfway through the year to probably get close to 40 or so visits to street photography places this year. Additionally, I've made a whole lot of photos during that time, and that's what's allowed me to kind of notice things in a different way. So it takes time. Be patient with yourself. The first time you go out to a location, you're going to probably feel like you missed some things, and that's normal. You will. Again, the example of that granite pillar in front of the bus stop that acted as a mirror, I've walked by that so many times and never noticed it until the one time I did notice it. So you'll need to come back, be patient with yourself as you learn your skills, learn your techniques, learn what lenses and cameras and settings and all those things you prefer to use, plus what time of day you prefer. It'll look, all your locations you go to in street photography will look different seasons, different time of day. And also, if you're in a place like downtown Bellevue that is having a lot of construction, it'll look different week to week as the buildings go up or others come down. So go back, repeat yourself. It's going to be different every time you go. And then tip number 1, here we are. Tip number 1, you don't have to photograph people to be doing street photography, at least in my opinion. A human element is super helpful, super awesome in that it's a great attention point, also can lend context and scale. But for a lot of us, myself included, it's kind of awkward or uncomfortable to photograph people. Thinking about how if someone was photographing me as I'm going about my day, I may not really like that. So there's lots of photos to make that don't involve people in a street photography environment. So for me, some examples of things I do is some reflections, just elements in windows, Cheesecake Factory, yay. And details, this is a construction cone stack, the traffic cones. It looks like they get dipped in some kind of plastic and it almost looks like wax melting here as it had dried, but now it's dried solid, so that's what it looks like. If you do want to photograph people, there are some suggestions I have for ways to do it that is both non-confrontational and hopefully feels comfortable and not creepy. Again, remember in the US, it's legal for non-commercial purposes to photograph people visible from public, but so remember that. So one way you can do that is to photograph people and help keep them anonymous in the photo. One way to do that is to photograph part of the person that doesn't identify them as a unique individual. Another way is to do silhouettes, so there's just an outline of the person. Another way is from the back or behind. Another way is through reflections, where you maybe camouflage part of their appearance, or at least one of the advantages of doing reflections of people is you're not pointing the camera directly at someone, so it doesn't hopefully feel intrusive to you or to them. So here's some examples of that. And so this is just a part of a construction worker inside just their hand. Here's another set of hands doing some work on a construction project in Bellevue, but it does add a human element, which I do quite like. Here's a crane operator reading some directions while he's waiting for something. Again, even though his whole body is pretty much in the photo, his face is hidden by that bar, the door where the door meets and the window meets. Lady walking down the street from the back. I really like this one because of her yellow hat and the yellow signs and the reflection. And then another person from the back with very distinct hair. A reflection of someone in a restaurant, again, kind of camouflaging, hiding them with the window panes here, so it's not necessarily a specific identifiable person, both for their sake and for mine. It gives me more flexibility in how I might use the photo, plus I'm trying to be respectful to the person in the photo. They're just doing their life and they don't necessarily want someone pointing a camera at them eating dinner. But sometimes, as in this photo, when I'm caught, so to speak, you get someone who wants to be in the photo. So these two guys, these construction workers, they noticed me and said, "Hey, take our pictures. We're really excited about this." And obviously they waved. I got the phone numbers of one of the guys, and I sent him the photos. He was pretty excited. So sometimes that happens. In the times I've been doing it, it's happened exactly one time, and that was it. So everybody's experience of photographing people and how it feels both comfortable to you and the potential response from the people that you're photographing will be different. So be aware of that and be respectful first and foremost of the people that you might be photographing. Be aware of how your presence with the camera might make them feel uncomfortable. And if it feels uncomfortable to you, there's still lots of ways to photograph in cities without really photographing people, or to keep them anonymous and totally unaware necessarily of what you're doing. So I hope that makes sense, but I don't think you have to have people in your photos of street photography. That's kind of how I originally approached it. I'm starting to include more people as I feel both more comfortable with it and finding ways to do it, again, that I think is respectful of the other people who are in the photos that didn't ask to have their photo taken. So those are some tips that I use when I'm out photographing in the streets, doing street photography things. Again, I hope you found it helpful, and I appreciate your watching today. If you have any other tips, suggestions you would like to add to the conversation, please do that in the comments below. I'd also really appreciate if you hit that like button, because I have to say that because I'm on YouTube, so thanks. Also, I hope you're doing well out there, and I look forward to seeing you in another video. So until that time comes when I see you in that next video, stay safe, stay well, and have fun creating photos. Bye for now.